in the forgotten corners of medieval Europe, beneath the creaking floorboards of taverns, and behind the crumbling altars of moss-stained churches, there existed a breed of men who walked not in daylight but in dread. They were not noble knights, nor famous rebel snow songs were sung in their names. These were the ones who whispered with death, the forgotten assassins of a darker age. To become such a man was never a choice made from desire, but from necessity, hunger, or exile. Many were once soldiers discarded after wars ended, or peasants with too many mouths to feed and nothing but mud for shelter. What led them to the knife was not vengeance, but desperation, and so they faded into the cracks of cities, becoming shadows, nameless and unrecorded. The image we now conjure of the medieval assassin robed in black, blades hidden beneath silk, eyes glowing from beneath a hood is a myth painted in hindsight. The truth was dirtier, colder, and soaked in blood that rarely washed out. These men wore rags, not cloaks. Their weapons were crude, chipped daggers, kitchen knives sharpened on stones, broken spears refashioned for close combat. There were no mentors, no grand orders or secret societies, only cold calculation and a willingness to slit a throat if it meant one more meal, one more night under a dry roof. Each kill was a silent pact with damnation. There was no glory in their craft, only survival. The targets were rarely tyrants or evil barons. More often, it was a merchant who had crossed a powerful rival, a bishop accused of heresy by another clergyman, or a jealous husband looking to remove a wealthy adversary. Payment was negotiated in back rooms, usually whispered between a coin purse and a candle stub. But coin did not mean safety. The assassin knew that once the deed was done, the client might vanish or worse, betray them. A successful job could mean a swift blade to the back the following night. Trust did not exist. And so, before every strike, the assassin had to decide, was this contract worth the risk of vanishing forever? Planning was an art formed in shadows. They observed from afar, never asking questions, never appearing twice in the same place. They learned the way a noble's cloak dragged on stairs, how long a servant paused before knocking, how the moon lit the courtyard at different angles. Every movement had to be known. One mistake meant death. A slipped step, an accidental glance from a guard, or a squeaking boot could unravel weeks of preparation. And even success did not guarantee survival. If the target died too loudly, if the killer was seen fleeing, the city would wake with torches and swords, hunting ghosts in alleys and basements. Poison was a treacherous tool. The ingredients were unreliable, measured not in drops but in guesses. Too little, and the victim merely vomited. Too much, and they died too quickly, arousing suspicion. The safest poison was the slowest, taking hours or days, mimicking illness. But that required patience, a luxury few assassins had. A kitchen boy might talk, a rival might intervene, and so the blade remained their truest friend. Quick, silent, irreversible. A single thrust, a cut in the dark, and the world shifted forever. Yet even the blade betrayed them. A dull edge, a missed artery, a target wearing unexpected armor beneath robes. These things turned a clean kill into a noisy mess. Blood sprayed where it shouldn't. Screams echoed in halls not meant to hear them. Panic followed. There was no time for prayer, only flight. The assassin never celebrated. There was no drink raised in triumph, only more fear, more running, more hiding. For the moment a man learns he can kill for coin, he also learns that he, too, can be bought, sold, and disposed of just as I. As they moved through cities, they adopted names like whispers, aliases spoken once and then discarded. No friends, no family, no trace. Every town held a promise of shelter, but also the risk of recognition. To be seen was to be remembered, and to be remembered was death. In a world where records were rare and suspicion ruled every street, vanishing was the only true art. The best assassin was not the one with the sharpest blade, but the one whose name was never known, not even to himself. Once the contract was whispered, and the coin the assassin became something less than a man and more like a shadow. His pulse slowed, not with calm, but with the cold focus of the condemned. The targets were no longer nameless. They bore titles, power, and protection. They lived behind stone walls and velvet curtains, surrounded by loyal guards who were paid to kill on suspicion alone. A law might sleep in a bed wider than a peasant's home, but never slept soundly, because men with wealth knew someone always wanted them dead. And so the assassin watched them from afar, night after night, until patterns emerged from behind glass and iron, He studied not just the target, but the rhythms of the household, the way a maid lingered too long in the corridor, the exact time the wine was brought upstairs, the dog that never barked unless it was Tuesday. Observation was the first weapon, but preparation required more than eyes. He needed silence, access, disguise, a missing kitchen servant, a messenger delayed on the road, a candle boy who suddenly became sick. These tiny accidents opened the gates. The assassin slid into place as though he had always belonged. A nod here, a soft word, there, never enough to draw notice, only just enough to pass unseen. But time was never a luxury. He could not wait forever. Nobles traveled, seasons changed, and rumors spread. If a guard heard a tale of a strange new stable hand who asked too many questions, the game was over before it began. So the kill had to come quickly, but never without care. In a world where lives ended for sport, it was not the death that mattered, but the silence it left behind. Screams were failures. The perfect kill was one no one noticed until morning, when a bed grew cold or the wine went untouched. A dagger was still his companion, but the strike was never random. The body had to fall softly on cushions, into a basin, sometimes onto the killer's own shoulder, before being laid gently on a floor. If there was blood, it must stay hidden. If there was a noise, it had to be disguised. A door creak timed with wind, a grunt masked by music. Every kill was a dance with detail, a ballet written in fear. And once it was done, the assassin did not linger. There was no time to gloat, no moment to admire the work. Every second after the strike was borrowed from death's own ledger. Escape was its own art. Doors used once could not be used again. Paths planned in light looked different in the dark. Sometimes he crawled through cellars filled with rats, pressed against cold stone, waiting for a patrol to pass just inches above. Sometimes he fled through garden hedges, muddy and torn, heart hammering louder than boots on cobblestones. The city did not sleep when blood had been spilled. It awoke with a fury. Bells rang, dogs barked, men with torches scoured the alleys, shouting oaths and swinging blindly. And through that chaos, the assassin moved like foe, gameless in shape, but always retreating. If he survived, he could not return to where he slept the night before. The man who left was not the one who returned. His hands were stained in ways soap could not wash. He might find a note where there had been none, a coin purse missing, a glance too long from a merchant's wife, all signs that someone had noticed. Paranoia was not illness, it was instinct, because betrayal was inevitable. Sometimes the very man who paid for the murder would pay again to silence the murderer. Loose ends were not tolerated by lords with secrets, so he kept moving, town to town, border to border. Each village became a blur. He no longer saw faces, only threats. A child who stared too long, a priest who asked too little, a butcher who never blinked. He became less a man than a myth, moving beneath the skin of the world, unnoticed, and still the work continued, because death, once accepted, becomes a hunger, and coin, once earned, is never enough. There is always another job, another man in silk who fears the night, another whisper in a corner, another face to forget. Even the best grew tired. Their blades dulled, their hands shook. Some chose one last contract, a final death to earn enough to disappear. But the world was small, and memory long. The more skilled the killer, the more dangerous the whispers. And one day, they would find themselves staring down a blade not of their own choosing, recognizing the eyes of another shadow sent to erase them. In this world, even legends died alone, with no name, no witness, and no mercy. As the years passed and bodies fell quietly into darkness, the assassin's presence began to linger longer than intended. He had sworn never to be known, never to be named, yet the world had a cruel habit of weaving ghosts into legend. In taverns where firewood crackled and ale flowed thick, old men spoke of him not as a man, but as a curse, a figure dressed in rags, face hollow, breaths silent as smoke. Some claimed he never aged. Others said he was the son of a demon, birthed by plague and baptized in noble blood. Fear does not need facts. It feeds on silence, on gaps between truth and terror. Villagers began to fear strangers, a man traveling alone, with too many scars, or eyes that lingered too long, might be dragged from the road, accused of sorcery or poison. Superstition clung to backwater towns like mold to stone. The assassin, once merely invisible, now had to erase himself completely. He discarded names, not just to hide, but to survive. A curious merchant, a kindly priest, even a child asking where he'd come from, any of these could be his death, because now the idea of him killed faster than any blade he carried. Poison had once been a luxury, clean, distant, silent, but its use became more perilous with each passing year. Lords now hired food tasters, not one but two. Wine was tested in silver cups, meals served by family alone. Kitchens were patrolled like armories. The assassin found himself forced back to the blade, for steel could not be tasted or burned or done. Yet even that grew dangerous. Nobles slept in chainmail beneath their silks. Doors were trapped. Pets were trained to snarl at strangers. And so, every contract became a labyrinth. Not only must the target die, but the path in and out must be redrawn each time. The assassin no longer hunted men, he hunted margins, moments, cracks in the rhythm of the world. And then came the image. Inspired by rumor, desperate men took up knives and claimed as legend. They failed, most of them. Caught too soon, killed too loudly. But each one left a trail, and each trail, though not his, pointed back to him. Guards began to search not for names, but patterns. A missing servant, a vanishing stable boy, an outsider who asked no questions. The very habits that had once kept him alive became his curse. He was no longer hiding from men, he was hiding from a story that grew louder with every lie it absorbed. Clients became more dangerous. Some hired him not for efficiency, but for the spectacle. They wanted to say they had used the shadow, the ghost, the nameless man who could not be caught. It made them bold, reckless. Some bragged in court, others wrote letters they thought could never be read. But paper burns, tongues loosen, and soon the assassin was being hunted not just by guards, but by those who once sought him. To know him was to risk one's own life. And so, like a snake biting its tail, he began to cut down the very clients who fed him. Survival no longer meant profit, it meant preemptive silence. His face was now the most dangerous weapon he carried, not because of what it looked like, but because it could be remembered. He wore masks when possible, painted with ash and oil, or bound his head in rags and straw like a leper. He bent his spine, dragged his leg, faked coughs and stutters. He became 10 men in a day, none of them real. And still, people guessed. A woman crossed herself when he passed. A boy followed him too long through a market. A soldier stared too hard at the line of his jaw. These were the sounds of danger, the soft murmurs before the storm. So he turned to the forests, the edges of maps. He slept in ruins and caves, beneath roots and stars. He learned the paths no horse could travel, the rivers that hid no bodies. He became less human, more whisper. Hunger gnawed at him. Sores festered. The cold cut deeper than any sword. But he lived. And living, to him, was the only victory that mattered. He no longer dreamed. He did not remember the names of those he killed. But he knew the way blood smelled on a quiet night, how it steamed against frozen ground, how it never truly left his hands. In some towns, mothers told children that if they lied, he would come. In others, his name was scratched into the backs of churches, hidden under paint, spoken only during storms. He had become a myth, and yet he bled, he coughed, he feared. Myths do not rot from within, but he did. And still, when the knock came, when the parchment was slid beneath a door or left beneath a stone, he answered, because there was always one more job, always one more man who thought himself untouchable. There comes a moment, not marked by bells or trumpets, when a man begins to fade from the world he once walked through, not because he is forgotten, but because he chooses to vanish. For the assassin, this moment did not arrive suddenly, but slowly, like rot beneath floorboards or fog swallowing a village at dawn. His bones grew slower, his wounds healed less perfectly. The blade that once danced now trembled slightly in the wind, and though he was still feared, still whispered about, something in him had begun to turn hollow. He had survived longer than most of his kind, but survival had emptied him. He had killed men of every stripe, noblemen, bishops, soldiers, and swindlers. Some had begged, others had laughed, a few had even thanked him, and yet, when he tried to remember their faces, he could not. Only fragments remained, a ring falling to stone, a final breath clouding a mirror, the faint warmth of blood on his wrist. These were the memories he carried, packed tightly like blades in a satchel. But what haunted him more were the names he never learned, the lives that unraveled because of a single thrust, the children who grew up hearing that their father simply disappeared. He no longer knew what he looked like. Mirrors were dangerous things, and none had been trusted for years. He feared that if he stared too long, he might see something else behind the glass, something watching, waiting. He began to wonder if the man he once was still existed, or if the mask had long since become his skin. People no longer called him anything, not even friend. And so, one night, beneath a sky scraped raw by stars, he dug a small grave not for a body, but for a name, his own, the last trace of it, buried beneath cold earth, unmarked and unknown. He wandered farther from cities now, where no one asked questions and no one offered contracts. In the deep woods, the wind did not speak of kings. In the mountains, even memories froze before they could form. He slept in places where wolves would not go, where even his dreams left him alone. And still, the world pulled at him. Once, a messenger found him with a scroll sealed in wax and blood, another name, another price. And though his hands shook as he read it, though his knees ached with the weight of time, he accepted. Because even when the fire is almost out, a man who has only ever burned cannot live in the cold. But this time, he was not unseen. Something had changed. Perhaps it was the slowness of his step, or the way his breath caught when climbing stone. Or perhaps the legend had grown too loud, too wide, and there was no longer any place for the man inside it. As he made his approach through the garden, past the outer wall, beneath the arch, where moonlight split like bone he knew, the trap had been set long before he arrived. They were waiting. Not guards, not clients, not even enemies, but reflections, ghosts, the past, armored and armed. There was no struggle, no final kill, only silence. And when dawn came, the body was not found. No blade lay in the grass, no blood stained the stone. Just a whisper, passing between servants and nobles alike. He's gone. Some say he escaped, fled east, became a monk, or wandered into the desert to let the sun burn away his sins. Others insist he was taken by devils, that he belonged to something darker than man, and had returned to it at last. But the truth, if truth still matters, was much simpler. He had become a story, not one etched into chronicles or sung in mead halls, but a quieter tale, one passed between thieves, muttered by dying men, scratched into prison walls with broken nails, a warning, a prayer, a curse, that somewhere, in the dark corners of the world, there was once a man who could not be bought, could not be caught, and could not be known. A man who walked so carefully through time that even time eventually lost him. And sometimes, when the streets fall silent and a candle flickers too suddenly, those who know the old ways say his shadow still moves just beyond the torchlight, not because he's still alive, but because legends, unlike men, are very hard to kill.